Hey, it's the first Thursday of the month, and I am thrilled, as always, to have Mr. Welton from Nautel with us. Jeff has got lots of good things to talk about, and today we want to talk about IT. It's not simple anymore. Back in the day when computers first started finding their ways into a transmitter building, you remember we might have one computer for the whole place, and everybody had to kind of learn how to use it and share it. And as it proliferated, we had a TRS-80 in one room and an Apple in another room, and but then networking started to happen, and some people, yeah, they innately got it. Others went to school and learned Novell or learned Microsoft Server and things like that. But today, it's even more complicated than that because we have all the problems that are concomitant with malware. We have problems in taking care of the fact that almost everything is IP connected now. Transmitters, consoles. One little station here has got their codec, their mod monitor, their EAS receiver. Everything is all connected with IP, and now your temperature, your thermostat can be connected by IP. Your lights. There's so many things here, and yet each of these opens a potential pothole in case of a bad actor. And so, basically, we're going to talk a little bit about the very beginning basics, the things that we need to know. Perhaps if you're not the IT professional, but you still need to know. And you can direct your IT folks, if needed, to understand what you're doing. I just mentioned a little while ago that the little Native American station here has got an IT department that's very much on their own. They don't respond to email or phone calls until they want to. And it's not the way things should be, but it's the way some things are. Now, to kick us off with Mr. Welton, I thought it was very intriguing. He told me that he learned about these little switches. And we want to talk about what we can do without help ourselves, simple steps to security, and little switches on the wall. What happened, Jeff? You are muted, sir.
Sorry, I was unmuted and I thought I was, and anyway, I clicked the wrong button. How are we doing now?
We hear you loud and clear, sir.
So I'm going to start with the caveat that I've got a couple of contractors upstairs who are renovating the bathroom because like with IT, the one thing I've learned is when I'm in over my head, it's time to call somebody. Actually, before I get in over my head, it's time to call somebody who knows what they're doing. So if there's too much background noise, let me know, but this mic is usually pretty good at rejecting that. So the little lights, Sunday evening, Amazon's Alexa service had a major meltdown. And for about 2 hours, roughly, if you had a house full, and that's why I was just reaching up to unplug Alexa so that I could say the name without actually having a bunch of things happen. But if you called on her, depending on which device you were looking at, you get a little blue ring and then it shut off. What it wouldn't do was whatever you were asking it to do. And that kind of got me thinking, it's like, you know, we get really dependent. I mean, you walk, when we get up in our house in the morning, whoever's up first goes into the bathroom. It's like, Alexa, good morning. And several different spots in the kitchen turn on. The coffee maker's powered up. The microwave, the light over the microwave is turned on. One under the counter is turned on. She starts playing the weather in the bathroom and displaying the news in the kitchen. And so you can just sort of have a flow from one to the other, and it's all automatic and it's beautiful when it works. And that's the key phrase, when it works. And it got me thinking, you know, I don't now turn it on my coffee maker. Okay, I can go over and hit that manually. And that's what I was talking about, the lights. I had to learn what those little toggle switches on the wall were for all over again, because I don't think I flicked a light switch in probably 2 or 3 years. It's just Alexa, turn this on. Alexa, turn that off. Um, so belt and braces, backups, I've beaten that drum before, but you can have the fanciest, most automated, wonderful IT setup on the planet, but if you don't have redundancy, then you got a problem. And the trick, and we've talked about this before, you can't just have like, okay, an example out here, Eastlink is our cable ISP, the big one. And when we had a power outage a couple of weeks ago, that's what I was saying before. The power went down for quite a while. It's funny, in a comment that somebody just hears the occasional flushing sound, but the toilet is currently out in the carport, so I'm pretty sure you don't hear occasionally flushing. Anyway, so Eastlink we had a power outage. Eastlink's batteries lasted about 12 hours, and then the internet went down. And my wife kind of looked at me at the time and said, well, this would be an argument. You should have got that Foxnet subscription that you were talking about getting to save a little money. So just for grins, when the power did come back on, I called Foxnet and said, hey, what backbone do you guys run on? Well, we run all our stuff runs on Eastlink. Okay, that answers that. So again, I could have had Foxnet, but if Eastlink's down, Foxnet's down too. So when you do a backup with a second ISP, make sure they're not running on the same physical infrastructure. And that's kind of where I was going with that. Barry, do we have sharing?
Do you want to give us your IP address so that other people could perhaps manipulate your coffee in the morning?
127.0.0.1.
Smarty.
So, and this is why we have a router. Yeah, no, we blocked the you could also use 192.168.0.1. That'll get you just as far from the outside world, but it works for me. And that is probably one of the big things. I'm going to try to let's see if I can make this work. Some days it works, some days, everything looks like it worked this time. So, I beat the drum on documentation over and over and over. I don't care what you're doing, whether you're wiring a studio, whether you're installing a transmitter, whether you're putting in a network, a computer network, you need to have documentation. And this is probably the cleanest map. And to be brutally honest, Alex Hartman found this in a Google search. So I need to do a reverse image search on it at some point so I can properly credit it. But, you need a map. And anywhere where your network, flipping over to security, but anywhere where your network can reach the outside world, whether it's intentional with an internet connection or potentially unintentional with somebody intruding on a WAP, on a wireless access point, you need a firewall. A lot of people don't think about it, but as an example, if you've got a network connection from your studio to your transmitter site, or from point A to point B, studio A to a different studio, or to a network NOC, anything like that, all those connections should be firewalled to one extent or another. And I mean, with us, for example, I talk about my little radio station a lot. Well, I say my little radio station. I do very little, probably less than any other volunteer in the place. But the little radio station I play around with in all my spare time, we're fortunate that we've got dedicated fiber from the studio to the transmitter facility. So the transmitter building is quite literally part of our studio. We've still got it firewalled because fiber, not so much as some of the older methods, but it can still be intercepted if somebody gains physical access to the head end building. So that's the kind of thing that I tend to beat the drum on. But mapping, my goodness, if you don't learn anything else, if we don't take anything else away from today, you need a map. And Barry, you started off talking about some of the old school networks. When I started at Nautel in a million years ago now, our network was a Intel 8086. That was mine. And 8088 that Kevin Rogers, who was our service manager then, is now our owner, but that was his. They were both running Lantastic and connected with a piece of coax, and that was the entire Nautel company network. Once a week, I did a incremental backup of the Clipper Summer 80s, Summer 85, Summer 87, the Clipper database that we ran. So I did an incremental backup and then used a modem to dial up Gale down in Bangor. And we did a 2-hour telephone call where we updated each of our networks over, and God forbid that somebody tried to transfer a call to you while that was happening. So, that was the good old days. And then we graduated, and about the time I got out of IT was after I crawled through the attic stringing Cat3 cable with my teeth. And that was good times. A side note, somebody in the chat asked how you put a ferrite on a Cat6 cable, and you can put ferrite on Cat5, Cat6, whatever. Most of it, if it's really well shielded, you shouldn't have to, but you get those nice little clip-on ferrites in the plastic housing are awesome. So little segue and side note there too. That's my bird's eye view. I want to open the floor up because I see a bunch of names in here that know a lot more about IT stuff than I do. Like I said, my basic mission and all this stuff is to go out and find people smarter than me to talk about it. So what am I missing? What's the one thing that comes to mind? Oh, VPNs. Somebody can talk about those for a little bit.
Yeah, VPN is an interesting and controversial aspect because a lot of the IT departments only want to do it with the expensive VPN applications, but a lot of engineers, shall I say, or others want to do the free VPN.
Yeah. And as always, to an extent, and I'll quantify that, but to an extent, you do get what you pay for. With a free VPN, you may get something functional that will do what you need it to do. You may have limitations on bandwidth. You may have limitations on possible host sites for it. So it kind of, like here at home, I use TunnelBear, and TunnelBear is a free VPN. I use the paid version of it because it gives me more data, and that's a big deal. But if you're just using it, for example, to access a transmitter or the telemetry at the transmitter site, free VPN may work just fine for what you want to accomplish. I'm not the guy that says you need FortiClient or any of the other ones for every single VPN requirement.
Well, when we talk about these different VPNs, free VPN, I assume that that's just a download off the internet. When we talk about these things, you've got the firewall here at the very first part of your map. And what does somebody have to decide? Where are we going to do this? Before the router? After? Well, it has to be before the router, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, a VPN is a virtual private network, so you can set it up pretty much anywhere in the system. But yeah, it's got to be a server. It's got to be after the router pretty much, because you've got to be able to direct the traffic through it. So, and again, it depends how you're setting it up. Like if you're just doing a single computer, just load it on the computer and away you go, so you got computer, router, firewall done. And the firewall may or may not be actually part of the router. So it does depend a lot on your specific configuration. And again, that's something, I mean, one of the best books, and Alex was talking about this, we did the session, we did Introduction to IT, and it very quickly got over my head. So I think there's the introductory level, and then there's Jeff down here somewhere. And but one of the things that Alex mentioned was that there are a lot of good resources, and he mentioned Networking for Dummies. And I've got a copy of Network. I think it's probably a first or second edition because it talks about novel networks. So it does go back a day or three.
Well, hey, Barry and Jeff, if I'd like to interject something, just to clarify something. We run across essentially three very different types of VPNs in our day-to-day world. Since many of us work at radio stations, the kind of VPN that is typically advertised ad nauseum on radio shows, barter shows, for example, or on podcasts, that they say, hey, sign up for NordVPN or EasyVPN or Jeff Welton VPN. These are for people who are at hotels and coffee shops. They protect your data that's on the local Wi-Fi that you're using in some local environment. They go to some server somewhere. You can choose the server place, but once it leaves that provider's server, it's out on the public internet just as anything else would be. And if you're connecting to something back at your radio station and you're using NordVPN, for example, you're not protected all the way to the radio station. You're protected to their server, and that's it. So there's a purpose for that. If you're in coffee shops all the time or hotels like I am right now, that's what you're looking for. Another type of VPN often comes either for free or for an additional charge with the router you may have at your radio station. And you would come up with a key, you'd put a client on your employee's laptop or computer, and then so your employee will, their VPN client will connect to your router at your radio station, whether you're at a coffee shop or at home or wherever, and you'll have that encrypted tunnel there. And that really is secure from your employee's location to the broadcast facility. Honestly, I'm not smart enough to set these up. I have tried with several different brands of routers and failed each time. I know it can be done. I see people do it. I'm just not that great at it. The third, and by the way, that's what you need for remote employees, is what comes with the router or can be purchased with your station's router. The third type would be a point-to-point VPN. So if you've got a facility in Kalamazoo and a facility in West Undershirt, and you need them over the internet to talk to each other as if they were one network or have access back and forth, then your routers can typically be set up for a point-to-point VPN or a point-to-multi-point VPN. And then that data would be secure even though it's going across the public internet. Now, there are plenty of options for software-defined WANs, and I'm not going to get into that because I only know enough to say software-defined WAN. But those are the three major types. And I just want to caution that going and getting NordVPN for $59 a year and using it from a coffee shop doesn't secure your radio station. It only secures you at the remote point where you're at.
Well, what I was going to do at this point was start by saying what you don't do. You know, I think it's important. I think everybody on here probably is going to say, yeah, I know this. You don't hook your transmitter directly to the internet.
Yeah, no, so you would say everybody knows that, but you'd be surprised. Now, and I'll quantify. Last time I searched for Nautel using an IoT search engine, I only found a dozen. So that's a good sign. And of those dozen, half of them were locked down servers at the facility where somebody had them open, visible for specific reasons, usually to let one of the engineering guys access it from home. So yeah, transmitters, not so much, but there are still an incredible amount of barracks units out there pre-2017 when the username and password didn't exist that are connected to running radio stations and fully wide open and accessible. So as one example, Sean had asked what software I used to make that sample network map, and Sean, you might have missed that. So Alex Hartman scammed this or scavenged this off of the internet. I've got to do a reverse Google search to figure out exactly where he scavenged it from so I can put the proper accreditation in there. But yeah, definitely not my skill set to draw that. Frank mentions OpenVPN running on a Raspberry Pi, and to take Kirk's one step further, the point-to-point VPNs like the Forti clients and the high-end stuff, and we use Fortinet at Nautel. Most of them also come with, depending on the level of security, they may have two-factor authentication where you need to log into an authenticator, which is what I have to do for mine, and generate the one-shot password to log into your network. Some of them will have a physical token beyond that, an actual, like a little USB dongle that you've got to either wave or touch or whatever to access. So, you know, multi-factor authentication. But the one thing that word of caution with VPNs, and we're dealing with this at work right now, is you got to be careful. There's a way to configure a VPN. I'm going to screw this up so somebody can correct me when I get it wrong. But it's basically a split VPN where half of it is secured and half of it is not. And you really need to be careful where you access a split VPN from, because you can very cheerfully overlap the secured and the unsecured. So again, like Kirk said, it's way beyond my ability to set one of those up. And I know our IT guys, we need more of them, because it's become such a huge part of doing business.
When I worked for QSC, they just sent me a Cisco Meraki box, I believe it is, that put everything I plugged into it was then on the corporate network that tied their sites all over the world together. And I could access the equipment I was testing with and so on. So that worked well. We always hear about, insecurity of doing stuff in coffee shops and so on. And I think that generally people are using web browsers, and they are probably accessing encrypted sites with HTTPS. So I don't think the coffee shop is as dangerous as it once was.
No, it's probably quite true. The whole idea here is that in the coffee shop itself, if you look around, there may be people that are doing some sniffing and waiting to see what your software. Again, I'm far from the best guru in the world, and but I know that there are people that say that they can sniff out a password very quickly with some software. And yeah, if you're in a very crowded coffee shop, you might want to be careful, or just don't access your bank.
Yeah, if it's HTTPS though, and pretty much everything is now, since you can get certificates for free from Let's Encrypt. I think it's very secure. It's only HTTP or Telnet or something that people will be able to sniff. They will be able to see the IP address you're going to and perhaps your DNS lookups, but that's about it, I think.
Yeah. Now, the other challenge beyond that is most of the time, and I'll use me as an example. If I access my bank in a coffee shop, I'm probably doing it on my phone, which means I'm using the bank's app. So that opens you to a whole different level of possible scrutiny. Historically, what I've done is shut the Wi-Fi off and rely on the cell service, but turns out they can sniff that too. And Alex showed me one day, he had me log into, I don't think I had logged into my bank, and not that I don't trust him, but I don't trust anybody that much. And anyway, he had me log into something on my phone on the wireless network, and he had the password figured out in a matter of about 15 seconds. So, and that's now, and I don't remember whether it may have been an HTTP site. I don't remember that part. So, the point is that if you're not physically connected to the router that you're connecting to the internet with, then there's always a chance that somebody somewhere is going to be able to snip it. It's the same as, RFID. I don't tend to use the tap on my credit card if somebody's standing right behind me at the gas station.
You talked about putting transmitters directly on the internet. Is the web interface on the transmitters HTTPS?
So the web interface at the moment, which is kind of an unintended benefit, if you will, because we're still crippled by Flash. Crippled is the wrong word, but we're still dealing with it. So now you've got to go through our app, and the app is encrypted. 256 character, if I remember, but I am just pulling that out of my hat, so that could be wrong.
Another thing about mail applications, I just wanted to mention, not all email applications have encryption, and some have it, but you have to turn it on. So it's best to access your email from a browser if you're at a coffee shop, because if you take an unencrypted email application out and access it, you'll get your email just fine, but then you're a sitting duck then.
Email security, I think, is incredibly important because that's where you get password resets and things like that. We recently did financing on our home, and talking with the escrow agent, they talked about the importance of getting the wire transfer correctly, and somebody did have their email hacked, and then they sent them wire instructions, and they lost hundreds of thousands of dollars because they sent it to where the email sent.
We had a situation not terribly long ago where somebody hacked a bunch of, or hacked a customer email and sent out a bunch of invoices with the Nautel logo on them and claiming to be from Nautel on a spoofed address that went somewhere not Nautel. You know, obviously, you know, we're the ones that hear about that because, well, I sent you that invoice and it's like, that we didn't send you anything. And so that's how we found out about it. Roland makes a really good point in the chat about education being the key factor here, especially with email security. I mean, we've had, in the last 3 years, we've had one major incident where somebody in finance who probably should have known better, but I mean, her specialty is numbers, not email security, you know, just like my specialty is transmitters, not email security. Knock on wood, I've been really lucky not to click on anything in an email yet, but education is critical. I mean, teaching folks, you just can't willy-nilly click on every link again, you know, and I mean, how often do you see, you know, I mean, for me, I chase my mother around because bless her heart, she's more tech savvy than a lot of 80-year-olds. But if you send her something in an email with a link on it, she's going to click on that link.
Roland, could we invite you into chatting with us here a bit? Because this is very important information. Social engineering is a major problem, plus the fact, hey, you got weekend board ops. And some of them don't really care because it's not their computer. And they're going to go trolling around the internet and they could land on a very bad site. Roland, do you have access to a mic, or maybe I'm putting you on the spot here and you're not in a place where you can talk?
That does remind me, I hear about drive-by downloads, and I don't really know how that happens. How can something download without you actually asking it to?
All right, someone want to answer that question? Basically, what you're doing is you're asking for a web page, and on that web page there will be embedded software or a line of script, and that script downloads. Just like when you get an email very often from a marketer, you'll get in there a 1 pixel picture, and that pixel picture being downloaded tells the sender that your email is hot and it's a good email address, which they then sell on to other people.
Of course, my email programs has a special button for download unsafe images. There is the concern about images taking advantage of a problem in a browser where buffer overflow or something. That also possibly happens with JavaScript, but I don't think that there should be an issue with this drive-by download stuff. But again, I don't know how it would happen unless it were a problem in the browser.
Well, again, when you go for a page in a browser, you're asking the computer in your browser to download that HTML page and whatever's on it.
Yes, and ideally your browser handles all that stuff correctly. It's going to get images and HTML and JavaScript, and I think that should be about it.
Right, but the JavaScript, it's not hard to embed a JS call that'll automatically run whatever you tell it to run, unless you've got the knowledge to go into the advanced. And I'm using Chrome as an example because that's what I work with. But unless you've got the knowledge to go into the advanced settings and tell it to ask, it does not necessarily default to ask before running on every situation. I think Edge has gotten a lot better about that. Of course, it's also on a Chrome platform. So, but if you're running one of the older ones, or if you're running Firefox, you have to physically tell it in a lot of cases.
Well, one thing that I found out, or we have learned here in KTSF, is that we're not up against from a teenager's working in his basement. We're up against state-sponsored cyber, I would say, warfare already. Yeah. Like CISA sent out an alert that Russian state-funded and state-motivated bad actors are already doing their thing, and they're trying to knock off our emergency grids, our important infrastructures, and even telecommunications, and we can add broadcasting to that. So the way we look at it is we can do everything we can on the hardware side of things, put DMC, put firewall and everything like that. But it's much easier to fool one of our personnel to click a link, to download the file. And they usually use social media like Facebook, or they always go for urgency. But like for example, there's a card, American Express sent me an email. And I told my wife, I don't even have Amex. So this definitely is a phishing scam. But the more devious really is our HR person received an email from her husband, which purported to be from her husband, but it wasn't. And it's because she's from HR, her name is out there on the website and people are submitting resumes to her. So it's easier to victimize her through social engineering. So anyone in your company, like CEOs and anybody like your FCC contact or closed captioning contact, most probably they will be targeted by phishing emails. And like I said, it's much easier to get people to click a link or to download the file than to get through your firewalls. You can do whatever you want to do with your firewalls, but it's useless if one of your staff will leave a door open and let the bad actors come in.
And I mean, an example on that too, if you look on the AUI of our transmitters, you got the phone home feature, which is great because it's only sending data out into the Nautel server. It's a one-way communication, but there's a little checkbox that says, don't check this unless not advised by a Nautel support tech. And that little checkbox will drill through just about any firewall using the same protocol that Skype uses. And at that point, you've established a two-way path. So it's really, yeah, like Mary says, it's important to look at the email address and then links too. If you hover over a link in your email, you can see if the link and the where it's going really are the same. And a lot of times they're not. Sorry, Roland, I kind of butted in.
No problem. I just wanted to add one more. I emphasize it to the board and to our staff that we can survive the pandemic. I mean, we've got good salespeople, we've got good programs. We can very much survive the pandemic, however hard it may be. But a ransomware encrypting all our broadcast files can possibly kill the business. Because it's when you are hit by a ransomware and everything's encrypted, including your broadcast automation files and things like that, it will be just like putting up a brand new station just to get back into business. So everybody from the board, from the president should understand that. Otherwise, they will not, they will not get behind you when it comes to training people, because the weakest link is one of our employees. That's the weakest link, not the firewalls, not the router. There's enough technology for that, but there's not enough technology to make people smarter, I would think so. Because you'll be surprised what people do on their computers. You'll be definitely surprised. So I'm just saying it's very important to train people, first of all, than to really waste a lot of money on infrastructure, but then do not spend money on people. That's all.
So
thank you.
It's funny, we did our session on Tuesday and our director of IT pinged me on Teams after, and he goes, I have to call you a hypocrite. And I said, well, what's that? And he goes, well, every time I try to implement a new security measure, you're up there hollering at me going, you're making my job harder. And I said, but then I watched this webinar and that's all you're talking about is the same stuff that I've been trying to do for 2 years. And I said, yeah, sorry about that. I said, I try to walk the walk, but I don't promise I'm always that good at it. One thing I want to click hit, Roland had mentioned port forwarding, and that's something it's a double-edged sword. Port forwarding gives you a little bit of obscurity, but it sure doesn't hide you. And let me click ahead a few slides here for this. I just loaded up the slideshow that we used yesterday. So the challenge with port forwarding is you can use it, but at that point, now what you're looking at here is what I found with a Shodan search for barracks. So I'm looking for barracks. I looked at Nautel first, and I did not see any Nautel transmitter at this address. So then I search for Barracks, and when Barracks comes up, it shows me several open ports on that IP link, or on that IP address rather. And so I start clicking my way through the ports, and those are the 4 things that I found. And the Nautel transmitter, bless their hearts, did not have the default username and password. So, you know, but I'm pretty sure I probably could have guessed it fairly quickly. Now, having said that, their streaming client, their Innovonics RDS generator, both wide open and unprotected, and their TP-Link gigabit router, all right there, beautiful. So, you know, port forwarding is only as good. Basically, it keeps out the people that don't really want to find you. You know, definitely, again, what I said before, if you've got a connection coming in from the outside world, needs to be firewalled first. Block every single port you don't absolutely need, and put in a proper VPN. You know, and that's what Kirk was talking about. Corporate level, you can get some less expensive ones. You don't have to go to the thousands of dollars a year. I mean, you know, it depends on what you're protecting and how big your organization is. You'll scale that. By the same token, and we'd mentioned this during our session Tuesday, if you outsource your IT, remember that they are going to speak IT really, really well. They are not going to speak audio over IP. They're not going to speak Livewire. They're not going to speak WheatNet. They're not going to speak any of that stuff. They are going to talk very much about your business computers and very little about your automation system. So you do need to sometimes educate them, or assume that you're going to have to take on some of the load yourself.
Port forwarding is very handy, but it should never be the only thing you use. For at least whatever you're talking to needs to have a strong password as a minimum, so that somebody who finds the port, great, now they have to have a password. So that's helpful. And other firewalling also is helpful, but never use it as your only method of blocking.
Right. And I mean, Roland had mentioned the team viewers and the other virtual network config, or the VNC type systems, and those are good as far as they go. But again, depending on what you're paying for, there's a certain level or lack of security involved there. And I know TeamViewer's been compromised more than once in my career.
And they're also a very difficult thing to work with. If you try to use it on your home computer without a commercial license and connect to a station, they'll suddenly
pull the plug. Yeah, been there, done that too. And I mean, we're still using VNC to get to our transmitter, but again, we've got a dedicated fiber, so at least there's some security just on the physical layer.
Another thing you don't want to do necessarily is to use the Windows remote desktop. I don't know about the Chrome version.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the remote desktop is just basically another type of VNC. I mean, maybe not exactly the same, but like whether you use TeamViewer, AnyDesk, remote desktop, they're all the same thing. And like Chris says, unless you're running it through a VPN, there's still a certain element of risk. Even with a VPN, you know, you've got the talking back to the social engineering, you never know who may have let their security tokens out. So, you know, you've got some security, but again, depending on what you paid for.
Well, to combine that with the email, recently, this whole thing with the two-factor authentication, somebody actually put a program up on Google Play, 2FA, two-factor authenticator, which was a Trojan. And 10,000 or so people downloaded it before somebody discovered this. And it's out there, and people think that they're going to be protected, and they're not.
Yeah. And I mean, I know for us, and again, going back to the VPN and say we do pay the mega bucks for FortiClient, they will only let you use the 40 token authenticator app. So that's the only app that'll work. I can't download a FortiClient authenticator into my other authenticator app, the one that controls almost everything else I do. But you have to have the dedicated one from them. I don't know if Alex is here, but I know in his day job, they use physical tokens. So again, they have a little dongle that they have to use to access their VPN. So yeah,
well, let's go back to the previous slide that you had up there with the very basic layout there.
Oh, that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's let's just talk about this for a moment for those that are again not internet gurus. Now you've got an internet connection, you've got your modem router, and now you've got port 80. Well, let's see. Let's just say that that's for your browser or for your transmitter, and you got 443. But let's say that that's 9,000 for a codec. And then you got port 20. I'm not sure what you might have on port 20, but let's talk about for a minute, if that's the situation you should have, you got transmitter, codec, maybe a remote control. Where should we start to protect it? The first thing you mentioned is a firewall.
Yep. And I mean, most routers, every router I've encountered has a firewall built into it.
Today.
Well, for several years, I mean, going back to my first, shoot, what was the, can't even remember the first router I had. I want to say that it was, no, I can't remember. Doesn't matter. I mean, the only difference is some of them turn it on by default and some of them don't. I mean, the one, I've got an Eris up here now, and it did have the firewall enabled by default. So
well, they should be. They should be.
You would hope so. But don't, you know, my wife likes to use the, you know what happens when you assume saying every time I do that, which is several times a day, both assuming and making an ass out of her and me. But, you know, I guess I'm a big fan of trust but verify. Beyond that, you should check the firewall if for no other reason than to making sure, again, that you're blocking every port you don't need. And the funny thing is, you mentioned port 9000 as a codec. Well, port 9000 is also the importer port for a Gates Air HD generation system. Wait, okay, I'm going to get this wrong. Either they use 8000 and 9000 or we do, and the other one uses 10 and 11. But whichever way. So, you know, ports can be reassigned and they can be forwarded, but ultimately blocking the traffic from the IP address. If I've got a connection to a transmitter site, right now, I know the IP address of everything on my transmitter site. I know the IP address of every computer that we have, or every host we have remotely, which is 30 of them. And we block everything coming into our studio that doesn't come from one of those IP addresses. So just as one example, you know, now that's not high level security, it's entry level, because anybody and their kid could go to a buddy's house and have access to the studio because they're coming from a trusted IP address. But it's a start. So, you know, that sort of thing.
I've not pulled out my Linksys WRT64 in a number of years, but I would be surprised if it is properly firewalled, certainly not as a default. But yes, the Cox system that I've seen most recently has a switch for firewall and has a switch for port forwarding. So each of those can be set independently. Now you've got the 443 I see here from the internet to the router, and I guess that's going to be the same one right onto the computer on site in this particular case. Talk to us just a minute, if you would, about the port forwarding. Now, you got 192, 168, 150 as the top one there. And of course, the other is 10, 10, 10. Why not do 192, 168, 145.50?
And a lot of it, I can't speak to the history of why it became a thing. Maybe somebody else here can deal with that better. But a lot of it comes down to flexibility. And I mean, for me, it comes back to that first diagram I put up. I'm going to skip back to that real quick. Let's see, that one. I mean, you've got a finite number of devices you can have on any specific subnet. You know, you got 0 to 254, and some of those are reserved for other things. So in that case, you either have multiple subnets or you port forward within a subnet. And then you've got a whole bunch more openings because you got what, 11, 12,000 ports available theoretically.
Well, that's where I was heading, and Tim Posar is got his hand up, and maybe he'll elucidate a little bit here.
Yeah. Explain it in words that I can understand, because I'm terrible at this.
Or as my dad used to say, if you elucidate, you clean it up.
So I'm sorry, and I'm jumping in here a little bit late because I had another Zoom call right before this. So I assume you're talking about basically what security you need to have from preventing outside folks basically getting into critical systems on your LAN side.
But we're talking about why port forwarding isn't the ideal solution. But,
oh, great. Oh, I'm so glad you're covering it that way. Yes.
but what it is and how it works is where we are now.
Yeah, right. And I was just about to jump in to say, yes, this is a bad idea. Port forwarding is, even though you can ACL by source address, typically if you're going to have something like that, where you're going to have a public server, you definitely don't want the public server, or if you're port forwarding like you showed earlier, you don't want that public server on the same VLAN prefix that you have all your office computers on, or your PCI credit card machines, or anything else that you want, your automation system. That should be all firewalled off to someplace else. So if somebody was able to root that box through some sort of SSL zero-day exploit or something like that, then they would have access to the rest of your network.
I think it's useful to kind of remember where we are today as opposed to ancient. I know that the router I'm currently using, which I'm a little embarrassed, it was an emergency purchase at Best Buy because suddenly the Wi-Fi transceiver in my faithful Linksys died, and I was needing to get Wi-Fi working again. But the way most of these routers come out of the box, and I'm talking the consumer routers, they don't allow anything inbound out of the box. So you pretty much have to use port forwarding if you want to get anything into your network. You may even be port forwarding to the same port. I mean, I've had to do that occasionally, but let's not get too confused here, because in many cases, port forwarding is the only way you can allow an outside piece of traffic to come into your network at all. So you may wind up having to use it. But don't use it as the only thing.
Yeah, in situations that I've done, we've actually made port forwarding just the last thing you want to do. Everything that we do for site to site is going over VPN. So this way we don't have to worry about, what's enabled, what's disabled, what's going to be exposed to the rest of the internet and such. If we ever have to actually
missed the discussion on VPN we had a moment ago.
Yeah. Okay. So anything that, if you absolutely have to do what you're diagramming right there, that box, which is 192.168.1.70, would not be on the same subnet. And if this is meant for public internet access of an SSL server, so it should not be with everything else that you have on your office network. They should be on some other subnet that you have, 192.168.2 or whatever you want to call it. And then if you had something where you need to get into like control of like an automation system or anything else like that, and you absolutely have to use port forwarding, then you're going to lock that down by the IP address that that people are going to be coming from to be able to get to that. And again, that's secondary. You really want some sort of IPsec or OpenVPN or some other method that people are going to get into it, because that's going to be much more secure. And that the traffic's actually encrypted and there's authentication associated with it as well.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further at Nautel, and it's become like and I know, Tim, you missed this earlier, but I was saying our IT director watched our Tuesday webinar about IT basics and called me after to growl at me for being a hypocrite, because everything I'm telling people they should be doing there, I whine whenever he tries to do it and make my job that much, I've got to take a whole extra step, woe is me. But but one of the things that is really critical, I think, going forward, especially as we see more and more malware. And I mean, I know if you look at like Radio Guide, Radio World, or any of the trade magazines, and every couple of months you'll see somebody getting hit with malware. What you don't see are the little onesie twosie mom and pop groups that are getting hit with it almost literally daily. I mean, you know, I know of probably 20 in the past year. And yeah, Barry's got his finger up. I'm not sure whether he's testing the breeze or if he's just trying to see where the which way the wind's blowing.
There's the BDR, Jeff.
Sorry, but I just
we talk about security a lot.
So anyway, point being that we're implementing a lot of zero trust. So basically used to be, and again, remember, I go back to when Nautel was, our whole network was 2 computers and a piece of coax. And now it's much, much bigger. And as it's evolved and I've moved positions, I've at various points had access to a whole lot of stuff I really shouldn't have had access to. And now we've got this new IT director, and all of a sudden I'm going into a directory that I probably really don't need to be in, just to look for something or other, and discover I can't get to it anymore. And it's like, Greg, I can't. Yeah, no, you didn't need to, so bye. And zero trust is a really big deal because, and I'll give you an example. The DJ probably doesn't need to have access to the finance and billing aspect of the operation, usually. Most of the DJs I've encountered probably shouldn't have access to finance or billing. And so, you know, it comes back to what Tim's talking about. You partition your network and assign different subnets. So traffic's over here, automation's over here, engineering and transmitter telemetry are totally separate again.
But that's all good, Jeff. And I'm going to stop you right there, because what I want to do for us to have something to take away, all of us, not just the good guys and the guys, there's not any bad guys, but the educated guys and the gurus. And Tim, maybe you can help us with this particular screen. We want to start with very simple. I mean, yes, there's the transmitter, there's studio, there's the automation, there's the bookkeeping. Let's start with just one site. And I'll posit that this is a transmitter site. And you've got the internet, you got the router, and you got 3 or 4 things: the transmitter, the codec, the remote control, let's say, and a computer on site. Tim, we talked about putting a firewall in front of the router. Now you got port translate, the NAT. What's the difference? Why not, if you went to 192, 168, 145, 50? Is that going to give you any more security? Or do you need something in there that after 5 or 6 attempts, it'll lock it incoming out?
Well, again, it's what, so this sounds like this is a transmitter site, and this is a,
I'm just postulating that it might be.
Okay, well, if this is a transmitter site, you don't want to have any public access to the transmitter site, obviously. So the only way that you would get into that, and what I've done for transmitter site, for stations, is we'll set up Open VPN or WireGuard or something else like that between the studio router and the transmitter router. And that's the only way that you can access the address space that's on or access devices that are at the transmitter site. It's convenient in the fact that I can partition that off, so I can say only the engineering side of the studio can access the transmitter controls, like the exciters and things like that. So I can partition that at the studio side of things, but you're never going to use port forwarding on please never use port forwarding at a transmitter side, let alone a studio.
Well, how would you access the different parts?
It would look like, basically, so this is the other thing, is you have to be judicious about your address space and how you segment that. Obviously, you don't want to use, if your transmitter site is 192.168.1./24, you don't want your studio to be 192.168.1/24. You want it to have a different address space. So what'll happen is any traffic from your studio is going to say, oh, I need to go to the say you're at 192.168.2 at the studio. any traffic for 192.168.1, oh, I send that out the VPN. That goes to the transmitter site. So this way I have full access to the transmitter site for the people that need it down at the studio.
Suppose you're on a cell phone and you need to access your transmitter site.
So you'd run a VPN for that. So there's client VPNs you can use to put on, that you can set up on the router. So you'd run like, again, IPsec, L2TP, or OpenVPN on your phone or whatever, connect to the router at the transmitter site with that. And then you'd go directly to, your devices at 192.168.1.
Just out of curiosity, has anyone else done a 2-hop operation to get to your transmitter sites? I did this for years, mostly because, well, it was ABC Disney and we didn't have much control over the big piece of the IP system. But basically, the only way we could talk to a transmitter is to first remotely log into a computer that was on the Engineering Inside network, and then go where you needed to go. The only way to get to any of these sites was via the engineering network, which was completely separate.
So traditionally, those are called bastions or jump hosts that you would use. And those are the terminology that you would see out there.
Thanks. I never knew there was a name for it.
Yeah, and you can do that. There's some you just want to make sure that you're doing it through some sort of secure protocol. Unfortunately, things like Microsoft Remote Desktop and things like that are exploitable. So you don't want to use something like that. You want to have something that you have some faith in. So you'd be running this through, again, a VPN to the Bastion host, or using secure shell, SSH, or some other method to be able to get to the Bastion host. And then with confidence that you're going to log in with the Bastion host, that you have the authentication set up there, then you would have access to, your other devices behind that.
I'm going to make it a little more simple, maybe even. Suppose you're a contract engineer and you don't have access to the studio computer system LAN, and you want to access, because you're the contract engineer, 72.243.14.15. Now, what would be your recommendation to set up a secure link to the transmitter?
Wait, so you're a contract engineer that's off-site, that you're not at the studio? Okay. Mm-hmm. So again, I would use I'd use a VPN client. If I see somebody saying TeamViewer. TeamViewer just means that you're going to be running a PC, behind the firewall, and that you'd have sort of remote desktop access through TeamViewer and such. But that means you'd be running a browser. You wouldn't be able to run your applications. You couldn't run a browser necessarily on your client to directly connect to the transmitter, web browser, the web interface or something like that. If you run a
Notella UI is an example.
Yeah, exactly. So I create VPN creds and certs for every person that I know that needs access, and they have their own unique authorization or cert or whatever else, and then I can turn those people up and down as I need it.
So would we go here between internet and router, and here's where you would put a VPN?
The router would support the VPN.
Okay.
There's a number of routers out there. I mean, even the cheapest ones you can buy, like Netgear and things like that, will support some sort of VPN. You want to stay away from kind of the older style VPNs like PPTP, which are, again, not that as secure. So you want to look for at least, L2TP over IPsec, or OpenVPN or WireGuard or something else like that.
I wish we had a couple of screens to show this.
Yeah.
But let's just make that assumption that in this router that we have in the middle of the screen, VPN is activated. Now, at the other end, on your desk computer or your iPhone or whatever, you need a piece of software with that same VPN on it, correct?
Well, it would have, you'd run like WireGuard or OpenVPN, the client, and that would connect to the router 72.243, whatever 15. And with the credentials that you have, which would either be either a login or password or a certificate that you generated to client, server certificate that you would create when you created the VPN. And then at that point in time, you have full access. If I was a contract engineer, which I am, then I have full access to the transmitter site and all the devices behind it. And I have some confidence, and I also have record keeping to know when people have logged into sites. So if there's a change, and I have a whole change management system that I use too to track configurations and when things got changed. So I can line up an outage or something else and say, oh, so-and-so was logged in at that point with a VPN. I need to go track them down and kill them because they did something wrong.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
and that's a big deal. And that's one of the reasons that, again, looking at our situation where we've got 4 facilities on 2 continents and several hundred employees, Greg, our IT director, can tell you at any time exactly who is logged into what machine and what they're accessing and doing at that time. And yeah, not so much to kill them, but if something goes sideways, then at least he can go back to so-and-so and say, what exactly were you doing at this time? Oh, I was surfing my email at the time, and I was, and it was like, may have clicked the link.
Now, I may be bringing things down to too simple a level, and if so, I apologize. But what I'd like to do, especially with you, Tim, I'd like to get together with you a little bit further and pursue this VPN, open VPN aspect. You get into the system, because I think it's a totally different discussion to talk about the studio, because all the myriad of connections at a studio and the tremendous security risks, whereas they can be minimized at a transmitter site. And so if we start with a very simple, I'm in a way, I'm kind of trying to say, let's teach security 101. Maybe.
So yeah, and that goes above and beyond VPNs to physical security as well. I can tell you that a portion of the incidents, and like look at an HD generator, it's a computer, whether it's embedded or purpose-built or industrial computer, whatever, it's a computer. And I can tell you that a percentage of the situations where we've had them compromised has been good because somebody walked in, downloaded an upgrade to an unverified USB stick and physically plugged that USB stick into that computer. So, security goes well and above and beyond remote entrance to, you need to look at layer 1 too.
Absolutely a good point. Yes. And again, what I'm trying to do in my questions in this section is, let's start with that very basic level. If we get somebody that wants to get into a transmitter site, which theoretically would only have 1, 2, 3 people that would normally have access. Next, we talk about the computer on site and the USB port. But here we have the router, and it's translating to the IP addresses locally. And this is what we want to secure. We'll secure the studio next time, but let's secure the transmitter. That's kind of where my thought pattern is. Start the first place. If I were to go to a new station, let's say I suddenly took a job in New York or Chicago or LA, Chris, I'm coming in and you've got 73 studios, you've got 150 employees, you've got 2 transmitter sites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is a huge IT thing. And first of all, you would hope that there'd be an IT department. But secondly, one person is not going to make this thing secure in one day.
Well, funny you should mention that. When we, one of our problems, which was maybe not unique to us, but the fact that the ABC Disney IT department was very closed and very unhelpful. So we pretty much had to do all of our own stuff on the engineering side. And of course, we had a completely separate network, and we did everything through routers. That is, if we needed, the automation needed to talk to the traffic system, well, that was IP specific, and it went through the router. And it said, oh, okay, you're allowed to go here, but nowhere else. And I even got old school. When we first put the ENCO system in 2000 on KSPN, I basically removed DNS from the computer and did those kind of things so that the overnight board op, spelled BORED op, would not decide, oh, I'm going to browse the internet on the automation machine. I did wind up with an interesting problem, though. They needed to download an audio cut from a site into the automation periodically. So I went very old school, and I don't know if any of you have ever are old enough computer people to remember that there are actually tables in Windows for setting IP addresses and domains manually in config files. But that's what I did. I went old school. I set the one address, the one site they needed in that table, so they could browse to that site and that site only. That worked well, but again, it's a long time has passed since then. The complexity of everything went up. All the studios now have automation. Mostly keep the network separated and only allow things between them through a secure router, and use VPN for anybody that needs to access from outside. And make that a permission that has to be set by the IT person in the router.
Chris, I would add one more thing to that. Instead of just disabling DNS, I would take out the default gateway on the configuration, so it only knows, it doesn't know how to get out to the internet even by IP address.
Yeah, I think I did that also. I may have had to put it back in to access the one site. I don't remember. It's been like, oh my God, how many years now? I don't remember.
That's what I was saying. I mean, we've come a long way from slinging coax in the attic with your teeth type thing. I've got to scoop, folks. I've got another appointment in 4 minutes, so I will dump the share. But this has been fun. And Tim, thanks so much for stepping up on this.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Jeff, it's always good to have you, and appreciate talking to us about this aspect of it. And we'll probably follow up with some more, but we hope you have a good weekend.
Thank you much. We'll talk to you all soon.